Alright guys, I just wanted to make a quick video on how to use a modeler with a power amp and an actual cabinet. And this is just going to be a general overall kind of thing. I have a HeadRush in front of me, so I mean some of this stuff may be specific to the HeadRush setup, but overall it should apply to mostly anything from like Line 6, Fractal, Kemper, even some of the older stuff, the pod. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first step in the process is that you want to go into the global settings of your modeler and make sure that the main output level is set to the correct thing. So typically there's two settings, one being line and one being amp. You want to make sure that it's set to amp. Line and amp have different volume levels. Line is more appropriate for recording audio, whether it be directly into audio interface or, maybe front of house, where amp is kind of set to run into the effects loop, the return, or, into the input. It's the more appropriate volume level going into the amp. It's not necessarily the end of the world if you run line, depending on the situation, but just to be safe, you're better off running amp. Line is just a lot louder, so you might actually turn it up, and then all of a sudden it's just like really loud. And it's not fun, especially when you're setting up for a gig and you're trying to sound check, and all of a sudden there's just a loud noise all of a sudden. So yeah, I would stick to amp. This also applies to 4-cable method, but maybe I'll make another video for that. Alright, so I want to discuss how you would hook all this stuff up. Pretty simple, it's 2 cables, or 3 if you count the speaker cable, but you just, first thing you do is plug your guitar into the modeler. And then you want to go out of one of the outputs on the back. Typically, if you're running a mono rig, you'd go out the left. If you're running in stereo, then you just run cables out of both outputs. So basically, you'd run, out of your output there. Now, after this, I mean, there's kind of a couple of scenarios that pretty common. Most people like to run just a dedicated power amp with their modeler, whether it be solid state or tube. I run the Mooer tube engine. It's a runs two EL84s, and it sounds great. It's really kind of gives me more of that realistic kind of tube amp feel that I'm used to, because I usually run tube amps, but I've kind of switched to modeling just for the ease. And then you could drive your speaker with this. It's got, I think, 8 and 16 ohm capability, so you can run like multiple types of cabs, 4x12, 2x12, 1x12. So it's a great option for that. I mean, there's other options there, like the Seymour Duncan Power Stage, or the Mooer Baby Bomb, which is a little 30-watt solid-state power amp, the size of a micro pedal, and it's really compact. So if you had like a HX Stomp, you could literally run it on like a little small board, and it'd just be great to have, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. Another option is, let's say, you got one of these little micro darks. It's basically a hybrid amp. It's got a tube preamp section and then like a solid state power section. What's the great thing about it is it has an effects loop. Now, this will apply to any kind of amp, whether it's solid state or it's tube. So what you would do is, again, going out of your output of your modeler, if you're running mono, left, and then you would run into the return. And what that does, whether it be, again, solid state or tube, it bypasses the preamp. So it's going directly into the power amp section of that amplifier. So it's great because you can kind of use what you already have. If you have something like this little micro dark, or any of those little I believe the Hotone ones, or like the Joyo ones, those little small amps, that Friedman B Mini, or any of those like boutique amp distribution little mini amps. If it has an effects loop, you can just use it going into the return, and then you control the volume from the modeler typically, depending on how the power amp's set up, but that's usually where you know, control the volume and everything. So it's pretty simple. Again, 2 cables, you know, 3 if you count the speaker cable going into the cabinet. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's talk about the signal chain that you'd want to run if you're going to be running into a power amp in an actual cabinet. So there's a bunch of different in and outs depending on which modeler you have, whether it be the Helix, you know, your Fractal, your HeadRush, whatever may have you. But generally, let's say in the case of the MX5, there is no like alternative out or like secondary out where you can kind of run the like your amp into the IR to maybe run into the front of house instead of having a mic'd up, you know, speaker on stage. So, and I'm sure there's a way to set up the signal path, but this is just going to be the simplest way to do it. So right now I got this patch set up, and I have an impulse response. So when I'm playing here at home or, you know, in the studio here, I need an IR. So I load up an IR. But simple enough, just what I would do if you're running into the power amp and you're going just straight up the output, you just take the IR and you just turn it off. So now it's almost like your traditional guitar amp and cabinet setup. You've got your preamp here, or I mean in this case they do have, you know, it's a Mesa or whatever, you know, and then you pipe that through your power amp and then drive your speaker, and then you could have all your effects in between the speaker and, you know, the power amp, just like an effects loop, and you're set up. So I mean you can have your different patches. Just make sure you turn off the you know, the cab sim emulation or your impulse response, so that way it doesn't color the speaker that you're actually using. So what I would use in my live rigs, for instance, is I'd use up like an old Peavey 1x12 that I bought used, and then swapped out the speaker for a V30 because that's the kind of sound I go for. And, you know, so I have a more realistic kind of cab tone live. But yeah, I mean, it's really as simple as that. It's just 3 cables. You got the one where you plug your guitar into the modeler, the second one going into either the effects return of an amplifier or power, or like any kind of like little small thing, like I said, like the micro terror is kind of cool for that, or even like the newer like BE Mini or any of those like little mini amps that Boutique Amp Distribution is coming out with. Perfect for that. Plenty loud for rehearsal. I'm sure you could probably get away with it in a gig. Or you could use a dedicated power amp like the Mooer tube engine. I really like that because it's tube powered, or, you know, your Seymour Duncan power stage. Anything like that, you take the output from the modeler and you plug it into the input. And then obviously your third cable is going to be your speaker cable, sorry, going into your cabinet. And that's it. I mean, if you run wireless, one more step. Other than that, pretty simple. I hope this helps you guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to try to upload a few more videos as I see fit. You know, I just want to upload stuff that'll kind of streamline and simplify certain things like this. Thank you for watching. Have a good rest of the day.